everyone, my name's Mandy and I'm an intern here at the Conservancy of Southwest Florida. Today, I'll be showing you how to make plantable paper. It's a fun little craft. I chose this one because it's one that you should already have most, if not all of the materials for, so you won't have to leave your home in order to get any of the supplies, and you'll be able to repurpose some materials that you'd usually throw out or recycle anyway. I also chose this craft because it's something that has a purpose to it. A lot of times when you're finished with a craft, you keep it for a few days, throw it out, it ends up in a landfill. But with this, you'll actually be able to do something with it afterwards, plant it. So that way, you're kind of reducing the waste that you'll be putting out into the world. And it's just something kind of fun that is a sustainable alternative to a lot of other crafts out there. It's also pretty easy and you can make it your own, really. Now, the things that you'll need for this include old pieces of paper. So I chose coloring sheets that were left behind in our Little Explorers play zone. You could use old newspapers, junk mail, scrap paper. You could even use old homework sheets in this. In addition to that, you will need 1 or 2 buckets or bowls, a colander, some native plant seeds, a blender. I would suggest using one that's kind of cheap or old, since paper can be a lot for these to handle. You'll also need a towel, old newspaper, or a drying rack as well. So let's get started. The first thing you'll want to do is rip up your sheets of paper into little pieces. The smaller the better. I'd say about that big is probably what's best. And you'll put that into your first bowl with enough water to cover all of the paper. For this, you want to let it sit for at least 5 minutes, but you could also let it sit for up to a few hours or a few days if you want to. Once it has sat for long enough, you'll go ahead and pour it into your blender. Once it's all in there, you might have to add a little bit more water because you want to make sure that it's at least a couple inches above your paper. All right, I'd say that looks good. When you're blending, I would suggest using settings like pulse or burst so as not to overwhelm your blender. You also don't want it to be more than halfway full for the same reason. Okay, once it gets to an oatmeal-like consistency, that's when it is ready. You'll want to put it into your colander. Make sure your colander is over a bowl, bucket, sink, so water doesn't get everywhere. Now, as it sits in the colander, you'll want to try to press out some of the excess water. You don't want to push all of the water out though. Want it to have enough to where the pieces still clump together a little bit. All right, that seems pretty good. So then I'll put this into my little bucket. And now you can add your seeds. I chose native wildflowers because native plants are really good for the environment. They bring in local native pollinators. And they also are used to the climate here, so they won't need that much extra care. Yep, you just want to put the seeds in and kind of knead them into the mixture until they're evenly distributed. And then you want to take a handful of your mixture and form it into a shape. Press out a little bit of extra water if you have to. I tried to make a heart last time I did this, and it didn't turn out very well, so I'll try to make a heart again and see if I can get it this time. You don't want your shape to be too thick because then it will take a really, really long time to dry, but you don't want it to be too thin because then it might crack or just kind of fall apart. I think that's a good enough attempt. Now you'll take your paper towel, newspaper, and just press out some of the excess water in here. And then you can either leave it on that towel or newspaper or put it on a drying rack and leave it out in the sun to dry. Now when I did these two, my little crown and my heart, they took about 3 days to dry, but it will depend a lot on the amount of paper base that you have, how thick it is, how big it is, things like that. I found that 1 sheet of paper tends to make about 1 of these if they're this size, but of course you can play around with it as much as you want. As I mentioned earlier, you can adjust this to make it suit what you want it to be. Things like using cookie cutters to make specific shapes, or adding food coloring in when you're soaking the paper can give you some options for colors for these plantable paper pods, so to speak. And then once they're dry, you're ready to plant.